Welcome to the Resource Nexus podcast. Today we're digging into Michael Jordan's biggest weakness, his three-point shooting. We'll break down the numbers, the myths, and ask the question no one wants to. What if the GOAT just couldn't shoot from deep? Plus, we'll look at a legit what if MJ to the 1999 Houston Rockets and why that move actually made sense. As always, hit up the resourcenexus.com for the articles and more. It's linked in the description. Airball, MJ's three-point kryptonite. Let's talk about the one part of Michael Jordan's game that never quite took flight, his three-point shooting. Now look, Jordan was a basketball god. No one's questioning that, but when it came to threes, the man had a legitimate Achilles heel. If you exclude the 181 games where the NBA moved the lineup right into his comfort zone, his career three-point percentage was just 28.8%. That's not a typo. That's Russell Westbrook territory. And get this, in his final year with the Bulls, during the last dance, while he was still MVP, still the scoring champ, he shot 23.8% from three when they moved it back. That's rough. Even when he came back with the Wizards, older, wiser, and desperately needing that long-range weapon to extend his career, he still shot only 24.1%. After decades of knowing this was a weakness, he couldn't fix it. I think that's clear. Now, I've had people come at me with, but if he played in today's era, he would have developed it. I'm not buying it. Some guys just can't shoot threes. It doesn't matter the era, the coaching, the spacing, the analytics, nothing. Just look at stars. Westbrook, Wade, Butler, DeRozan, all elite players, all modern, all had every reason to become good three-point shooters. Still didn't happen. Butler and DeRozan shoot over 84% from the free throw line. Westbrook was a 80+% free throw shooter for 8 seasons. So clearly they've got the mechanics in touch, but the three ball, still a mess. My point is, Jordan had contemporaries who did figure it out. Players his age or older who added the three to their game just fine. Let me drop a few names for you. Larry Bird, Dale Ellis, Danny Ainge, Trent Tucker, Sam Perkins, John Stockton, Terry Porter, Chris Mullin, Joe DeMars, Jeff Hornacek, Chuck Person, Kenny Smith, Del Curry, Dragan Petrovic, Mark Price, Reggie Miller, Steve Kerr. Even his college teammates, Kenny Smith and Sam Perkins, developed reliable outside shots. These guys are all from the same generation, some older. So this idea that Jordan's era was the reason for his poor three-point shooting, I'm calling BS. Let's not forget, Jordan grew up watching the ABA. That league pioneered the three-pointer. His childhood heroes, David Thompson, Dr. J, his favorite team, the Carolina Cougars, an ABA squad. So it's not like he was raised in some basketball vacuum where threes didn't exist. Even in college, when the ACC had a three-point line in 1982 to 83, Jordan shot 44.7% from deep. That's 34 of 76. Dude was 19. No issue with college range then. So what changed? The distance. When the NBA line was moved up, Jordan was solid. When it moved back to regulation distance, he cratered. Before, after, even with 20 years to work on it, he just never had the range, and not everyone does. This is a guy who once got smoked by Christian Lettner in ping pong, and got so obsessed he spent weeks learning how to beat him. You think a man that competitive wouldn't have fixed his jumper if he could? We all saw the 1990 three-point contest. Jordan had the worst performance ever. Still holds that record, and if we know anything about MJ, it's that he lived to silence doubters. So if he didn't develop a three-point shot after all that, Occam's razor, baby. He didn't because he couldn't. Now don't get it twisted. Jordan is still that dude. He's firmly in the GOAT conversation, first or second. No shame there. I was lucky enough to watch all 6 championships in real time. I even remember those early years, watching the Pistons bully the Bulls before they ever got over the hump. I'm not here to tear the man down. I'm just saying, if Jordan walked into the modern NBA with a 28.8% three-point shot, that's something he'd have to navigate. I mean, DeRozan and Butler are still great with similar limitations, but the floor is spaced differently now. The margin for errors tighter. Yeah, you can't just ignore that part of the game anymore. He might still have dominated, but he would have had to do it with that one very real chink in the armor. Welcome to the Resource Nexus podcast. Today we're exploring what could have happened if Michael Jordan joined the 1999 Houston Rockets. For the full article, check out the link in the description at theresourcenexus.com. As the Last Dance documentary established, Jordan said he still wanted to play in 1999, and this wasn't just some 20-year-old lip service. He actually came back and proved it by playing again with some nudging from two old friends. I think there was one spot that made sense where he could have been convinced to join in 1999. Let's look at the situation if the Bulls were still hell-bent on blowing things up after the Last Dance, as it seems they were, and Jordan couldn't convince any of the major players, Coach Phil Jackson, or ownership to keep the core together. I do think there was one viable landing spot that's rarely been mentioned for Jordan, who clearly still wanted to play in 1999. Ultimately, if Jordan was adamant about returning to the Bulls that year and took it public, I think the Bulls would have caved. They would have never been forgiven for letting a vocal, determined Jordan walk. So, what would have to happen for Jordan to go to the Houston Rockets? Basically, he'd have to never voice his opinions, knowing full well what the Bulls' front office and ownership wanted, and make a clean break once Scottie Pippen was traded to Houston. Now, the Rockets had Charles Barkley, a good friend at the time, along with trusty sidekick Scottie Pippen, who'd been his teammate for over a decade, plus Hall of Famer Hakeem, a contemporary from the legendary 1984 draft class. Before anyone says Jordan would never go play for another star-studded team, I think that's a myopic take. The Rockets were coming off a 41-41 season in 1998, and Clyde Drexler had just retired that summer. This wasn't a powerhouse team anymore, and they were years removed from their only championship run, which Jordan likely would have stopped if he hadn't retired. The Bulls or Jordan never lost to the Rockets in head-to-head matchups, and if Jordan hadn't retired, they probably would have beaten Houston in 1994, which gives Jordan even more cover to go there, knowing they'd never beaten them directly. It's not like the Rocket stars were uniting in their primes. These guys were all 35 or older and near the end of their careers. You could sell it like it was at the time, the old guard uniting to take on the rising Lakers and Spurs. Jordan eventually went on to play for the Wizards, so is it really that outlandish to think he might have wanted to play with Barkley and Pippen, especially if someone pitched him the idea, knowing he didn't really want to retire? A fellow contemporary like Dominique Wilkins was already playing for whoever would sign him at that point. Karl Malone left the Jazz a few years later to sign with the Lakers for almost nothing. Many stars were pushing to join certain teams to chase rings. By 1999, Barkley and Drexler had both made moves in that vein. So Jordan being a free agent and free to sign anywhere, this was not unprecedented. Now, let's talk about the salary cap and how Michael Jordan was paid through lucky timing and superstardom that elevated the entire NBA's profile. Jordan was paid more than the entire salary cap in his last 3 seasons. Teams could pay their own players whatever they wanted under the collective bargaining agreements at the time. There was no max salary. In 1998, the salary cap was $27 million per team. Jordan got paid $33 million, more than the entire Jazz payroll that season, just to put it in perspective. No other player topped $33 million until 2017-18. 20 years later. So if you want your mind blown, that's the magnitude of Jordan's pay at the time. This might make Bulls ownership's reluctance to pay more a bit more understandable. But the point here is, Jordan didn't need the money. He'd made it. If he wanted to do the Bulls a solid and take a minimum contract that year, with them or anywhere else, to make it happen, he could have. He was well on his way to becoming a billionaire athlete and didn't need to hold any team over a barrel. If it was about money, he wouldn't have retired in the first place. And so, as a free agent, if he really wanted to get to the Rockets, it was possible. The Rockets were about $5 million under the salary cap. They could have paid him well relative to most stars. Most stars made about $10 million at the time. Barkley himself made only $1 million that year. That's respectable, doable money to get Jordan on board. In a previous alternative history piece, we talked about Jordan's finger injury, the impact of the lockout season, and his regression. If you want to check that out, I'll link it in the show notes. Now, let's pick up with Jordan on the Rockets. The Rockets team in 1999, with Barkley and Pippen convincing Jordan to join in January somewhere between the minimum and $5 million of cap space just before the season starts. This was an old team, sure, but a formidable one, coached by Rudy Tomjanovich and featuring 4 Hall of Famers. Old farts, yes, but still playing at a high level for the NBA of that era. Here's their record and key stats without Jordan that season. They finished 31-19 and were the 5th seed. Player stats: Hakeem Olajuwon, age 36, 9.6 rebounds, 18.9 points, PER 23.1. Charles Barkley, 35, 12.3 rebounds, 4.6 assists, 16.1 points, PER 23.1. Scottie Pippen, 33, 6.5 rebounds, 5.9 assists, 14.5 points, PR 16.8. Jordan was the league MVP the prior season, even with his finger injury, considering how well he played the first 45 games with the Wizards 3 years later. It's very likely he would have still been playing at nearly the same level as in 1998, maybe even a little better, since he struggled shooting in 1998 due to a wrist injury during the regular season, but improved in the playoffs. If you add him to a starting lineup of Olajuwon, Barkley, Pippen, Jordan, and 23-year-old Cuttino Mobley, that's got to be a title favorite. Without Jordan, the Rockets lost to the Lakers in a close series, 3-1, and one of those games was a 1-point loss. You never really know how it would have worked out. But Dickerson was a disaster in the playoffs, as were Pippen, and Hakeem only averaged 13 points per game against Shaq that season, with a .461 true shooting percentage. Yet the series was competitive. If Jordan had been there to carry the load, I think it pushes them over the top. It's very likely they would have had enough firepower to take out the Spurs and cruise in the finals versus the 8th seed Knicks, with Jordan presumably with playing much better than the aging David Robinson, who he had dominated for years. Shaq was entering his prime and had just gotten the better of Hakeem. Unlike if Jordan had remained with the Bulls, where I think they lose to the Spurs in the finals, on this Rockets team, I think with Jordan they win the 1999 championship, giving Barkley his first ring. It was just a better team if it had existed than the Bulls. The 2000 Rockets. All right, let's dive into an alternate timeline with the 2000 Rockets. In real history, Scottie Pippen was traded to the Blazers for what basically amounted to spare change, all to save money. That doesn't happen if the team is winning or contending. You keep Michael Jordan's buddy around, and Pippen settles into a solid role player spot with the Rockets. He didn't have to be the number 2 anymore, because Barkley and Olajuwon were more than qualified for that role. Now, Steve Francis, in reality, the Rockets managed to snag the number 2 pick in the 1999 draft. Back then, you could really capitalize on dumb GMs, and Francis had the Grizzlies in a tough spot, flat out refusing to play for them. In the end, the Rockets gave up basically nothing of value, just Dickerson, a 2003 first-rounder, Brent Price, and Othella Harrington. That's it. Francis came in swinging from day one, co-winning Rookie of the Year, proving his worth immediately. Francis was dead set against Vancouver, so the trade was inevitable. And honestly, there wasn't much better on the market. Even if Jordan was still around or they'd won the title, the Rockets' trade package probably wouldn't have changed much. The Grizzlies likely expected Jordan to be gone or past his prime by 2003, and just like they did with Olajuwon and Barkley, and still would have pulled the trigger. Remember, Jordan wasn't carrying a team to the playoffs anymore by then and retired in 2003, so it's reasonable to think Francis would still end up with the Rockets. The same deal, same players, and an aging Jordan, just like Olajuwon and Barkley. The trade plays out pretty much the same. So for this timeline, we'll assume Francis is traded to Houston and Pippen is never moved. Here's how that Rockets roster would have looked that season. Steve Francis, 22 years old, 5.3 rebounds, 6.6 assists, 18 points per game, PER 18.4. Cuttino Mobley, 24, 3.6 rebounds, 2.6 assists, 15.8 points, PER 16. Charles Barkley, 36, 10.5 rebounds, 3.2 assists, 14.5 points, PER 19.8. Hakeem Olajuwon, 37, 6.2 rebounds, 1.4 assists, 10.3 points, PER 16.7. Scottie Pippen, 34, 6.3 rebounds, 5 assists, 12.5 points, PER 16.4. Pippen held steady compared to the previous year, but this was the year Olajuwon really fell off, mostly due to injury, missing nearly half the season, mostly December. He'd have been back for the playoffs, though. Barkley also got hurt in December and made a one-game comeback in April that was more ceremonial, marking the end of his career. By then, he'd let himself go physically. Now, if Jordan had still been there, playing at least at the level he showed in his first 45 games with the Wizards, this Rockets team is a playoff contender. Francis and Mobley would pick up a lot of the slack. The Pippen adds that veteran presence, and Barkley and Olajuwon contribute when healthy. Barkley might have come back sooner, in better shape, ready for playoffs. In reality, he'd already mentally checked out since the team was heading to the lottery, but he was effective when he did play. This would have been an intriguing playoff team, Mobley and Francis leading the charge for a solid 45-win squad the next year. Barkley was no longer the force he'd been, but still decent. Olajuwon could have shifted to a role like David Robinson's final years, focusing on defense and mentoring. Imagine that playoff picture, Jordan and the Hall of Famers leading, with two young stars ready to break out, but ultimately, facing the powerhouse Lakers or Spurs, it's a tough road. Moving on to 2001, this probably would have been the end of the road for Jordan and Barkley in 2000, but having young talent around might have motivated them to stick around if the team stayed competitive. Olajuwon and Pippen were still above-average starters on winning teams, especially with Francis and Mobley leading the charge, and this core could have persisted if Jordan wanted to stay. Here's their stat line for 2001. Steve Francis, 23, 6.9 rebounds, 6.5 assists, 19.9 points, PER 21.6. Cuttino Mobley, 25, 5 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 19.5 points, PER 17.7. Hakeem Olajuwon, 38, 7.4 rebounds, 1.2 assists, 11.9 points, PER 20.7. Scottie Pippen, 35, 5.2 rebounds, 4.6 assists, 11.2 points, PER 15.3. That's a solid core to build on. Barkley probably sticks around one more year, but with slightly reduced numbers. And Jordan, as we know from his Wizards years, could still put up 25 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists when healthy before injuries took their toll. Olajuwon even bounced back to a PER over 20. There'd be questions about how Jordan and Francis would mesh. Francis was known for his prickly personality, and we saw how young players clash with Jordan in Washington. It could have gotten tense, but in the best case, they make the playoffs, maybe even the second round, with a good 45-win team. But the Lakers and Spurs were dominant, and winning a title was unlikely. After this, Jordan probably retires or moves on to the Wizards, as he actually did in real life. Looking at Jordan's career trajectory, he had a wrist injury in the 1998 season that suppressed his shooting, so it's easy to trace a believable decline for such a consistent player. Here's a quick snapshot of his stats during those years, filling in gaps for seasons he missed or played few games. 1998 to 99, age 35, 5.7 rebounds, 4.3 assists, 27.8 points. Age 36, 5.8 rebounds, 4.3 assists, 26.7 points. 2000, age 37, 5.8 rebounds, 4.5 assists, 25.6 points. So here's the big takeaway. I think Jordan would have won his 8th title in this alternate universe if he never retired in the 90s and joined the Rockets with Pippen. I actually thought he could have made the finals with the Bulls in 1999 if he'd returned, but that team didn't have enough to win the title. The Rockets, in my opinion, they did. but likely they still lose to the Lakers or Spurs and never get close the next two seasons, 2000 and 2001. Had Jordan stayed with the Bulls until 2001, he might have made 2 or even 3 finals in a weak East, but I still don't think they'd have won the title in 1999. In the next episode, we'll explore what would have happened if Jordan was drafted by the Portland Trail Blazers, or if the Blazers made that incredible trade that was actually proposed at the time of the draft. Hint, Jordan was involved, and trust me, it would have changed the entire history of the league and Jordan's legacy, without a doubt. All right, that's a wrap for today. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you got some good insights. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with anyone who'd find it useful. And don't forget to check out the resourcenexus.com for more in-depth analysis. Until next time, check you later.
Cool. Guess we'll see you around.
All right, check you later.
Bye.
Wait, man, why are you always such a dork, man?
What are you talking
Check you
about?
later. Check you later.